transport ship shook as it entered the atmosphere of Epsilon 7. Jake Morrison gripped the safety rail and looked around at the other cadets. There were 200 of them, all from different planets across the galaxy. Some had 4 arms, some had scales, some floated in special suits filled with water. Jake was one of only 3 humans in the entire Galactic Military Academy. The moon below them looked like a nightmare. Red sand stretched in every direction. Sharp rocks jutted up like broken glass. Strange forests made of crystal grew in twisted patterns. 2 suns burned in the sky, making everything hot and bright. This was where they would spend the next 72 hours. If they could survive that long. Commander Vrelk stood at the front of the transport bay. He was tall, with 4 arms and eyes like an insect. When he spoke, his mouth clicked and clacked, but the translator collar on his neck turned it into words everyone could understand. "Listen carefully," Vrelk said. His voice was cold and hard. "This is the survival trial. You will be dropped in random locations across 1,000 square kilometers. You must reach 4 checkpoints over 72 hours. You will have no food, no weapons, no communication devices, just a water filter, a thermal blanket, and your emergency beacon." Jake touched the small device on his belt. The emergency beacon. If he pressed it, a blue flare would shoot into the sky and a ship would come get him. But pressing it meant failure. It meant dropping out of the trial. "Most of you will not complete this trial," Vrelk continued. "Most of you will activate your beacons within the first 6 hours. This is normal. This is expected. There is no shame in recognizing your limits. The survival trial has a 90% failure rate." Next to Jake, his friend Zos made a clicking sound. Zos was a Velkrine, with 3 legs that bent backward at the knee. He could run faster than almost anyone in the academy. 90%, Zos whispered. "That means only 20 cadets will finish." On Jake's other side was Prella. She looked like a jellyfish floating in a clear suit filled with liquid. Her homeworld was covered in oceans and she needed the suit to breathe air. "No human has ever completed this trial," Prella said softly. Her voice came from a speaker on her suit. "The longest any human lasted was 14 hours, Jake nodded. He knew the statistics. Humans were new to the galaxy. Earth had only made contact with alien civilizations 5 years ago. The Galactic Military Academy had only accepted human cadets for 3 years. Everyone said humans were too weak, too slow, too fragile for military service. "Final equipment check," Vrelk announced. "Surrender all technology now." The cadets removed their communicators, their data pads, their personal items. Everything went into storage containers. They were left with just the basics. 1 water filter, 1 thermal blanket, 1 compass, and 1 emergency beacon. That was all. The ship's cargo door began to open. Wind howled into the bay, hot and dry. Jake could see the surface of Epsilon 7 getting closer. The ship was slowing down, hovering just 10 meters above the ground. "First drop zone," Vrelk called out. Cadets 1 through 20 moved to the door. Jake was number 47. He watched as the first group of cadets jumped out of the ship. They fell through the air and landed hard on the red sand below. Some rolled. Some landed on their feet. Some landed badly and immediately looked hurt. The ship moved on. More drop zones. More cadets jumping. Jake's heart was beating fast. His mouth felt dry. He had trained for this for months, but training was different from the real thing. Cadets 40 through 60 moved to the door. Jake stepped forward. The wind hit his face, hot and full of dust. Below him, the ground looked far away. He could see rocks and sand and nothing else for kilometers in every direction. "Go," Vrelk said. Jake jumped. For a moment, he was flying. Then gravity took hold and he fell fast. The ground rushed up at him. He bent his knees like they taught him in training and hit the sand hard. Pain shot through his legs, but nothing felt broken. He rolled to absorb the impact and came up in a crouch. The transport ship was already moving away, heading to the next drop zone. Jake was alone. He stood up and looked around. Nothing but wilderness in every direction. The 2 suns beat down on him, already making him sweat. His uniform was designed to handle extreme temperatures, but it could only do so much. Jake pulled out his compass and checked his orientation. The first checkpoint was 15 kilometers north. 15 kilometers through unknown terrain with no paths, no guides, and hunter drones that would disqualify him if they tagged him. He took a drink from his water container, just a small sip to wet his throat. Then he started walking north. Not running, walking. He needed to pace himself. 72 hours was a long time. The ground was rough and uneven. Rocks were everywhere, sharp enough to cut through his boots if he stepped wrong. Jake picked his way carefully, finding the smoothest path he could. Speed was important, but so was not getting injured in the first hour. After 30 minutes of walking, he saw his first hunter drone. It was a metal sphere about the size of a basketball, floating through the air on silent repulsors. Red lights blinked on its surface. If that thing scanned him and got a clear reading, he would be disqualified. Jake dropped flat behind a rock. He pressed himself against the ground and stayed perfectly still. The drone hummed overhead, scanning the area. Its red light swept across the rocks just meters from where Jake was hiding. Then it moved on. Jake waited another minute before standing up. His heart was pounding. That was close. Too close. He continued north, moving faster now. The heat was getting worse. The twin suns were both high in the sky, and there was no shade anywhere. Jake pulled his thermal blanket from his pack and draped it over his head and shoulders. The reflective surface helped a little, bouncing some of the heat away. 2 hours into the trial, Jake saw his first emergency beacon go off. A bright blue flare shot into the sky about 3 kilometers to the east. Someone had given up. Jake watched as a rescue ship appeared and flew toward the flare. 10 minutes later, another beacon. Then another. By hour 3, Jake had counted 12 beacons. 12 cadets who had decided the trial was too much. He kept walking. His legs were starting to ache. His feet were getting hot inside his boots. But he had 69 hours left to go. This was nothing compared to what was coming. At hour 4, Jake reached a canyon system. Deep cracks in the ground that dropped down into darkness. He had to find a way around or a way across. Going down into the canyon would take too much time and energy. He followed the edge of the canyon, looking for a narrow point where he could jump across. Finally, he found one. Just 3 meters wide. Jake backed up, took a running start, and leaped. For a heart-stopping moment, he was in the air over the dark canyon. Then his feet hit solid ground on the other side. He stumbled but stayed upright. More emergency beacons fired into the sky. Jake counted them, 15, 16, 17. The trial was cutting down the numbers fast. At hour 5, the temperature started to drop. The first sun was setting, and the second sun didn't give much heat. Jake knew that when both suns went down, the temperature would fall to freezing. He needed to keep moving to stay warm. He checked his compass again. Still heading north, still on course for the first checkpoint. He estimated he had covered about 8 kilometers. 7 more to go. At hour 6, the sky was full of blue flares, emergency beacons going off everywhere. Jake counted 23 beacons in that hour alone. Cadets were dropping out in huge numbers. Jake thought about his beacon. How easy it would be to press that button. To end the pain and exhaustion. To get picked up and taken back to a warm bed and hot food. But he didn't press it. He put one foot in front of the other and kept walking into the gathering darkness. Hour 6 was when most cadets quit. Jake Morrison was just getting started. The darkness came fast on Epsilon 7. Both suns dropped below the horizon within an hour of each other, and the temperature fell like a stone. Jake wrapped his thermal blanket around his shoulders and kept walking. His breath came out in white clouds now. His fingers were getting numb. He had been moving for 8 hours straight. His legs burned with exhaustion. His feet had blisters that hurt with every step. The compass was hard to read in the dark, but he had been following the same direction for so long that he could almost feel which way was north. More emergency beacons lit up the night sky. Blue flares rising like desperate fireworks. Jake counted them out of habit. 28, 29, 30. That made over 60 cadets who had dropped out so far, less than 24 hours into the trial. At hour 9, Jake heard something moving in the darkness. Something big. He froze and listened. Heavy footsteps. More than 4 legs. The sound of claws scraping on rock. A ravager. The local predators that hunted at night. They looked like wolves but with 6 legs and armor plating on their backs. The instructors had shown videos during training. Ravagers were fast and strong, but they hunted by sound and smell, not sight. Jake slowly lowered himself to the ground and pressed flat against a large rock. He controlled his breathing, making it slow and quiet. The ravager was close. He could hear it sniffing the air, searching for prey. The creature walked past him just 5 meters away. In the dim starlight, Jake could see its outline. It was huge, bigger than the videos had shown, easily the size of a horse. Its 6 legs moved in a strange rhythm and its head swung back and forth as it searched. Then it was gone, disappearing into the darkness. Jake waited a full 5 minutes before moving again. His hands were shaking, but not from the cold. That was the closest he had come to real danger. If the Ravager had found him, he would have had to activate his beacon or risk being torn apart. He stood up and continued north. The first checkpoint had to be close now. He had been walking for almost 10 hours and had covered at least 12 kilometers, maybe more. At hour 10, Jake saw lights ahead. Not emergency beacons. Steady lights. The checkpoint. He pushed himself faster, ignoring the pain in his legs and feet. The checkpoint was a tall stone pillar, ancient and covered in strange symbols. A small shelter sat next to it with supplies. As Jake got closer, he saw another cadet already there. It was Korthos, a Threxian with 6 legs and a body covered in thick armor plates. Korthos was drinking from a water container and he looked exhausted. "Morrison," Korthos said when he saw Jake. His translator collar made his voice sound rough and tired. "You made it." "Barely," Jake admitted. He walked to the supply cache and refilled his water container. There were also protein bars, high-calorie food designed to keep cadets going. Jake ate one slowly, letting his body absorb the energy. "How many do you think are left?" Korthos asked. "Maybe half," Jake said. "I counted over 60 beacons." Korthos made a grinding sound that might have been a laugh. "I injured one of my rear legs in the drop. I am moving slower than I should. I do not think I will make it to checkpoint 2. Jake looked at the leg. It was swollen, and Korthos was keeping weight off it. "Do you want help?" "What kind of help?" Jake tore strips from the edge of his thermal blanket. It would make him colder later, but he could manage. He wrapped the strips around Korthos's injured leg, binding it tight to give it support. "That should help," Jake said. "Keep weight off it when you can. Rest here for a few hours before moving on." Korthos touched the binding with one of his front legs. "Thank you, Morrison. Your species is strange, always helping others even in competition." Jake shrugged. "The trial is about surviving, not about beating each other." They rested at the checkpoint for 2 hours. Jake allowed himself to sleep. Just a short nap with his back against the stone pillar. When he woke up, Korthos was gone. The Threxian had moved on toward checkpoint 2. Jake checked his compass. The next checkpoint was 25 kilometers northwest. 25 kilometers through more wilderness, more dangers, more exhaustion. He ate another protein bar, drank more water, and started walking. Hour 12. 60 hours left to go. The second sun was rising now, bringing a little light but not much warmth. Jake's thermal blanket was smaller after he tore strips for Korthos, but it still helped. He wrapped it tight and moved at a steady pace. At hour 13, he saw a group of 3 cadets in the distance. They were moving together, which was allowed but not smart. Groups attracted more attention from the hunter drones. As Jake watched, 2 drones appeared and scanned the group. All 3 cadets were tagged. Their beacons automatically activated, sending up blue flares. Disqualified. Jake stayed low and waited for the drones to leave before continuing. He was alone again, which was how he preferred it. Alone meant he could move at his own pace. Alone meant he only had to worry about himself. The terrain changed as he moved northwest. The red sand gave way to rocky ground with strange plants growing between the stones. The plants looked like crystals, hard and sharp and completely inedible. They caught the sunlight and reflected it in rainbow patterns. Beautiful but useless. At hour 15, another Ravager appeared. This one was hunting in daylight, which meant it was desperate or injured. Desperate animals were more dangerous. Jake spotted it before it spotted him and changed direction, giving it a wide path. The Ravager never saw him. More emergency beacons continued to fire. Jake had stopped counting them. The number had to be over 100 by now. Half the cadets were gone. At hour 18, the first sun reached its peak and the heat became unbearable. Jake found a small cave in the rocks and sheltered inside. He drank water and tried to rest. Moving in the peak heat would drain his energy too fast. Better to wait a few hours for the temperature to drop. While he rested, he thought about home, Earth, his family. His younger sister had cried when he left for the academy. She said he was crazy for wanting to join the military, especially an alien military in space. But Jake had always wanted to explore to see what was beyond Earth's atmosphere. Now he was on an alien moon, alone and exhausted, wondering if he had made the right choice. At hour 20, Jake emerged from the cave and continued walking. The heat was still intense but manageable. He had covered about 15 kilometers since the first checkpoint. 10 more to go. The landscape became more difficult. Hills rose and fell in waves. Jake had to climb up steep slopes and slide down the other side. His legs were screaming at him to stop, but he pushed through the pain. At hour 22, he heard screaming. Humans screaming. Jake changed direction and ran toward the sound. He found another human cadet, a woman named Lisa, trapped on a ledge above a ravine. A Ravager was below, trying to climb up to reach her. "Help!" Lisa screamed when she saw Jake. "Please help!" Jake looked around for something to use as a weapon. Nothing, just rocks. He grabbed the biggest rock he could lift and threw it at the Ravager. It hit the creature in the side. The Ravager turned toward Jake, forgetting about Lisa. "Activate your beacon," Jake shouted at Lisa. "Do it now." Lisa pressed her beacon and the blue flare shot up. The Ravager charged at Jake. He ran, leading it away from Lisa. The extraction ship appeared within a minute and pulled Lisa to safety. The Ravager, confused by the noise of the ship, gave up the chase and disappeared into the rocks. Jake leaned against a boulder, breathing hard. He had just saved someone's life, but had also used up precious energy doing it. He drank more water and checked his compass. Still on course, still moving. At hour 24, the first full day was complete. Jake had been awake and moving for almost the entire time except for a few short rests. His body was running on adrenaline and willpower. The protein bars from the first checkpoint were long digested. His stomach was empty and growling. The second checkpoint was close now, just a few more kilometers. Jake pushed himself harder, wanting to reach it before he collapsed. He arrived at checkpoint 2 at hour 26. It was in the middle of the crystal forest, surrounded by those strange plant formations that looked like glass trees. There was a shelter and a supply cache. Jake marked his arrival by touching his beacon to the checkpoint scanner. A green light confirmed he had made it. He was still in the trial. He opened the supply cache. More water, more protein bars, a new thermal blanket to replace the one he had torn up, medical supplies for treating cuts and blisters. Jake tended to his feet first. They were covered in blisters, some of them bleeding. He cleaned them carefully and wrapped them in bandages. Then he ate 2 protein bars and drank as much water as his stomach could hold. The shelter was small but protected from the wind. Jake crawled inside and allowed himself to sleep. Real sleep this time, not just a quick nap. He needed it. His body needed it. He slept for 4 hours. When he woke up, it was hour 30. Both suns were down again and the temperature was dropping. Jake checked the area around the checkpoint. No other cadets. No signs of anyone else nearby. He was completely alone in the wilderness. Jake left checkpoint 2 at hour 31. The third checkpoint was 30 kilometers away, the longest distance between any 2 points in the trial. 30 kilometers through unknown terrain with 41 hours left on the clock. The crystal forest was beautiful in the starlight. The formations glowed faintly, reflecting the light from Epsilon 7's distant stars. But beauty didn't matter when your feet hurt and your legs felt like they were made of lead. Jake focused on putting one foot in front of the other. He had seen only 2 emergency beacons in the last 6 hours. That meant most cadets who were going to drop out had already done so. The ones still in the trial were the strong ones, the determined ones. His real competition. At hour 33, Jake climbed to the top of a ridge and looked out across the landscape. In the distance, he could see storm clouds gathering, dark and massive, rolling across the plains like a wall. A dust storm. He had learned about Epsilon 7's dust storms in training. They could last for hours and reduce visibility to 0. The wind could reach speeds of over 100 kilometers per hour. Getting caught in one was dangerous. Many cadets would choose to activate their beacons rather than try to push through. Jake checked his compass and did some quick calculations. The storm was moving east. If he headed northwest, he could angle around the edge of it. It would add maybe 5 kilometers to his journey, but it would keep him out of the worst of the storm. He adjusted his course and started moving faster. The storm was coming quickly. At hour 35, the wind picked up. Sand and dust began to fill the air. Jake wrapped his thermal blanket around his head and face, leaving only a small gap for his eyes. The wind was strong enough to push him sideways as he walked. Visibility dropped. Jake could only see a few meters ahead. He kept checking his compass, making sure he was still heading in the right direction. Getting lost now would be fatal. The storm hit full force at hour 36. The wind screamed like a living thing. Dust filled the air so thick that Jake couldn't see his own hands. He tied one end of his thermal blanket around his waist and held the other end in front of his face, using it as a filter to breathe through. Emergency beacons began firing. Jake saw the blue flares through the dust, bright spots in the chaos. 1, 2, 3, 4. Cadets were giving up rather than face the storm. Jake kept walking. Not because he was braver than them, not because he was stronger, but because turning back meant admitting defeat, and something in his mind refused to accept that option. The storm raged for 6 hours. 6 hours of walking blind through wind and dust. Jake's exposed skin was raw and bleeding. His lips were cracked and painful. Every breath hurt because the dust got through his makeshift filter. At hour 42, the storm began to ease. The wind dropped and visibility improved. Jake emerged from the worst of it and found himself on a flat plain. Behind him, the storm continued to rage. Ahead, the air was clear. He saw 3 more emergency beacons fire behind him in the storm. 3 more cadets who had tried to wait it out and failed. Jake collapsed on the ground and just breathed for a minute. His whole body hurt. His throat was raw from the dust. His eyes were red and burning. But he was through it. He had survived the storm. He drank water slowly, washing the dust from his mouth. Then he checked his position. The storm had pushed him off course. He was further east than he wanted to be. He would need to correct his heading and make up the lost ground. At hour 44, Jake saw something that made him stop. Another cadet. It was Prella, his friend from the academy. Her hoversuit was damaged and sparking. She was floating just above the ground, barely moving. "Jake," Prella's voice came from her suit speaker. It sounded weak. "My suit was damaged in the storm. The power cells are failing." Jake examined the suit. The exterior had cracks in several places. The liquid inside was leaking slowly. Without the suit, Prella couldn't breathe the atmosphere. She would die in minutes. "How long until complete failure?" Jake asked. "Maybe 2 hours. Not long enough to reach checkpoint 3. You need to activate your beacon." "I know." Prella's bioluminescent body pulsed with sadness inside the suit. "I wanted to finish. I wanted to prove that my people could do this." "You made it through the storm," Jake said. "That proves you are strong. There is no shame in this. Will you finish?" Prella asked. "Will you complete all 72 hours?" Jake looked at the horizon. Checkpoint 3 was still 20 kilometers away. He had 28 hours left to cover that distance plus reach the final checkpoint. It was possible. "Maybe. I am going to try," he said. Prella reached out with one tentacle and pressed it against the outside of her suit, where Jake's hand was resting. It was as close to a handshake as they could manage. "Then finish for both of us," she said. "Show them what determination looks like." She activated her beacon. The blue flare shot into the sky. Within minutes, the extraction ship arrived and carefully loaded her damaged suit into the cargo bay. Prella waved one tentacle at Jake as the ship lifted away. Then he was alone again. Jake walked through the afternoon and into the evening. The twin suns crossed the sky and began to set. The temperature dropped again. He wrapped his new thermal blanket tight and kept moving. At hour 48, his body started to rebel. His legs were shaking with every step. His vision was blurring. He hadn't slept in 18 hours and had only eaten the protein bars from checkpoint 2. His body needed rest and food desperately, but checkpoint 3 was still 15 kilometers away. If he stopped now, he might not start again. He had to keep going. He began talking to himself to stay alert. Just random words and thoughts. Anything to keep his mind active and prevent himself from passing out. "One foot," he said out loud, then the other foot. That is how walking works. Very simple. Just keep doing it. At hour 50, Jake saw lights ahead, not emergency beacons. Steady lights. Checkpoint 3. He wanted to run toward it, but his legs wouldn't let him. He could only manage a faster walk. Every muscle in his body was screaming. His feet were agony inside his boots, but the checkpoint was there, real and solid and close. He reached it at hour 52. The checkpoint was a metal tower on top of a hill. A supply cache sat at the base. Jake touched his beacon to the scanner and the green light confirmed his arrival. 3 checkpoints down, 1 to go. Jake opened the supply cache. Water, protein bars, medical supplies, and something new. High-energy gel packs. Pure calories in an easy-to-digest form. He tore one open and squeezed it into his mouth. It tasted terrible, but he didn't care. He ate 4 gel packs and drank a full liter of water. His stomach cramped from taking in so much at once, but he needed the fuel. The final checkpoint was 20 kilometers away, and he had 20 hours to reach it. There was no shelter at checkpoint 3. Just the tower and the supply cache. Jake leaned against the tower and allowed himself to rest. He didn't sleep, just closed his eyes and let his body recover as much as it could. At hour 54, he heard something. Footsteps. Jake opened his eyes and saw another cadet approaching. It was Zos, his Velkreen friend. But Zos looked terrible. His 3 legs were moving in an uncoordinated way. His body was swaying. "Morrison," Zos said. His voice was slurred. "I made it." "You look hurt," Jake said. "Fell during the storm." "Hit my head." "Everything is spinning." Jake helped Zos sit down. He checked the Velkreen's head and found a large swelling behind one of his sensory stalks. A concussion. Definitely a concussion. "You need medical help," Jake said. "You need to activate your beacon." "No, so close. Only 1 checkpoint left. Zos, you have a head injury. You could collapse and die out here." Zos's 3 eyes focused on Jake with difficulty. "You will finish?" "I will try." "Good, someone should." Zos reached for his beacon. "Tell the instructors that I made it to checkpoint 3. Tell them I tried." "I will tell them." Zos activated his beacon and the blue flare went up. The extraction ship arrived quickly. The medical team could see immediately that Zos was injured and rushed him into the ship. Jake watched it fly away into the darkening sky. Now he was truly alone. No other cadets at checkpoint 3. No emergency beacons visible anywhere on the horizon. Either everyone else had dropped out, or they were so far away that their beacons couldn't be seen. Jake refilled his water container and loaded his pockets with gel packs and protein bars. Then he checked his compass one more time. The final checkpoint was northeast, 20 kilometers through the darkness. He started walking at hour 55. 17 hours left, 20 kilometers to go. If he could maintain a pace of just over 1 kilometer per hour, he would make it with time to spare. But his body had other ideas. At hour 57, his legs started to give out. Not just tired, actually failing. His knees would buckle randomly and he would stumble. His feet were so damaged inside his boots that each step felt like walking on broken glass. He fell at hour 58, just collapsed on the ground. He lay there for a minute, breathing hard, wondering if this was where it would end. Then he thought about Prella and Zos and Korthos and all the others who had dropped out. They had all asked him the same thing, "Will you finish?" Jake pushed himself up. His legs were shaking and weak, but they still worked. He could still walk. Maybe not well, but well enough. At hour 60, both suns rose together. The twin light was almost blinding. Jake shielded his eyes and kept walking. The heat during the day on Epsilon 7 was something Jake had never experienced on Earth. It was like walking through an oven. The twin suns beat down from the sky without mercy. The air itself felt thick and heavy, hard to breathe. Jake's thermal blanket was now protecting him from heat instead of cold. He draped it over his head and shoulders, creating a small pocket of shade. It helped, but not much. Sweat poured down his face and back. He drank water constantly to avoid dehydration. At hour 62, he reached a rocky area filled with sharp stones and deep cracks in the ground. He had to move carefully, testing each step before putting his weight down. His damaged feet made every step painful, and one wrong move could mean a broken ankle. He saw bones scattered among the rocks. Animal bones picked clean by scavengers, a reminder that this moon was not a friendly place. Things died here, things that were probably stronger and faster than Jake. At hour 63, he fell again. His right leg just stopped working and he went down hard, scraping his hands on the sharp rocks. He lay there for a moment, wondering if his body was finally giving up completely. But his mind refused to accept defeat. Jake forced himself to stand up. His right leg was weak and shaky, but it still supported his weight. He could still walk. Barely, but he could do it. The final checkpoint was visible now in the distance. A tall metal tower on top of a hill, maybe 8 kilometers away, so close. Just a few more hours of walking and he would be there. At hour 64, Jake's vision started to blur. Exhaustion and dehydration were taking their toll. He stopped and sat down in the shade of a large rock. He drank water and ate another gel pack. The food sat heavy in his stomach, but he needed the calories. He checked his supplies. 2 gel packs left, 3 protein bars, half a container of water, enough to get him to the finish line if he was careful. Jake allowed himself to rest for 30 minutes. His body screamed for more sleep, but he couldn't afford it, not this close to the end. He forced himself to stand up and keep moving. At hour 65, the heat reached its peak. The air shimmered and danced. Jake's throat was dry despite drinking water. His lips were cracked and bleeding. Every breath felt like inhaling fire. He saw something moving in the distance. At first he thought it was a hallucination, his tired mind playing tricks. But no, it was real. A hunter drone floating across the landscape, scanning for remaining cadets. Jake immediately dropped behind a rock and stayed perfectly still. The drone came closer, its sensors sweeping the area. Jake held his breath and pressed himself flat against the ground. The drone hovered nearby for what felt like forever. Jake could hear its motors humming, could see the red lights blinking on its surface. If it detected him now after coming this far, it would all be for nothing. Finally, the drone moved on. Jake waited until it was completely out of sight before standing up. That was too close. Less than 10 hours from the finish line, and he had almost been disqualified. He continued toward the tower. The terrain was getting rougher. More hills to climb, more rocks to navigate around. His pace slowed to barely more than a crawl. At hour 66, disaster struck. Jake's legs simply gave out. Not just tired, not just weak. They stopped working completely. He collapsed on the ground and tried to stand up, but his legs wouldn't support him anymore. For the first time since the trial started, Jake felt real fear. He was 5 kilometers from the final checkpoint with 6 hours left on the clock. Under normal circumstances, that would be easy. But his legs weren't working. He couldn't walk. He lay on the ground and stared at the sky. Both suns were starting to set. The temperature would drop soon. If he stayed here, he would fail. After 66 hours of pushing through pain and exhaustion, he would fail because his body had finally reached its limit. Jake thought about his emergency beacon. It was right there on his belt. One press and this would all be over. No more pain. No more exhaustion. Just a comfortable ride back to the academy. But then he thought about his grandmother. She had been a long-distance runner on Earth, competing in races that lasted for days. She had told him a story once about a race where she hit what runners called the wall, the point where your body tells you it can't go any further. The wall is not real, she had said. It is just your body's way of protecting itself. But if you push through it, if you force yourself past that point, you will find reserves you never knew you had. Jake took a deep breath. His legs wouldn't work. Fine. He didn't need legs. He rolled onto his stomach and started crawling. It was slow, painful, humiliating. But it was movement. He dug his fingers into the dirt and pulled himself forward. Then he pushed with his knees, then pulled with his fingers again. Inch by inch, meter by meter, he crawled toward the tower. At hour 67, his hands started bleeding. The rough ground was tearing the skin on his palms. Jake ignored the pain and kept crawling. 3 kilometers to go, the sun was setting. The temperature was dropping. Jake's whole body was shaking from exhaustion and cold, but he kept moving. Pull, push, pull, push. It became a rhythm, the only thing that mattered. At hour 68, he looked up and saw the tower. Still so far away, maybe 2 kilometers. 2 kilometers that might as well have been 200. His mind started to wander. He thought about Earth, about his family, about his sister crying when he left. She had been right. This was crazy. What was he trying to prove? Then he thought about all the cadets who had dropped out. Over 180 of them. They had all decided that the trial was too hard, that the cost was too high. And they were probably right. This was too hard. This was insane. But Jake had never been good at accepting reasonable limits. At hour 69, he reached a steep hill. The tower was at the top. Under normal circumstances, it would be a 5-minute climb. For Jake, crawling with his legs not working, it looked impossible. He started up the hill anyway, pulling himself up the slope with his bleeding hands, pushing with his knees, sliding back sometimes, losing progress, then starting again. It took him an hour to climb that hill. An hour of pure agony. But at hour 70, he reached the top. The tower was right there, 20 meters away. The final checkpoint. The end of the trial. Jake tried one more time to stand up. He got his legs under him, pushed with all his strength, and managed to rise to his feet. He stood there swaying, barely balanced, his legs trembling. He took one step toward the tower, then another. Then his legs gave out again and he fell hard. He was so close, just 15 meters to the tower. But he couldn't walk and he didn't have the strength left to crawl. His body was completely spent. Jake lay on the ground and stared at the tower. He had come 66 hours and nearly 100 kilometers. He had survived heat and cold, storms and predators, exhaustion and pain, and now he was going to fail within sight of the finish line. His hand moved to his emergency beacon. Maybe it was time. Maybe he had pushed far enough. But then he heard a voice. Not a real voice, a memory. His grandmother again from that same conversation about running. The finish line is not a place, she had said. It is a decision. You decide to finish and then you find a way to make it happen. Jake looked at the tower. 15 meters. That was all. Just 15 meters. He rolled onto his back and took off his boots. His feet were a bloody mess inside, but he didn't need them anymore. He took off his belt with the emergency beacon and tossed it aside. The beacon was temptation, the easy way out. He didn't want it near him. Then Jake started pulling himself backward toward the tower. Using his elbows and his shoulders, he pushed himself across the ground. Not crawling forward anymore, sliding backward. Whatever worked, 10 meters, 9 meters, 8 meters. Every movement was agony. His whole body was screaming at him to stop. But he kept going. At hour 71, he reached the base of the tower. The checkpoint scanner was mounted on a panel 2 meters above the ground. He needed to touch his beacon to it to officially complete the trial, but his beacon was back where he had thrown his belt. And he couldn't walk to get it. Jake stared at the panel and wanted to laugh at the absurdity. He had made it to the tower but couldn't complete the checkpoint because he had thrown away his beacon. Wait, he didn't need his beacon. The scanner just needed to detect his identification chip. The chip that was implanted under the skin of his left wrist. All cadets had one. If he could reach the panel and press his wrist against it, that would work. The problem was the panel was 2 meters up and Jake couldn't stand. He looked at the tower's structure. Metal struts forming a framework. Maybe he could climb it. Not with his legs, but with his arms. Just 2 meters. That was nothing compared to what he had already done. Jake grabbed the lowest strut and pulled himself up. His arms were shaking and weak, but they still worked. He got his right elbow over the strut and used it for leverage. Then he reached for the next strut up. Pull. Reach. Pull. Reach. He climbed the tower like someone drowning climbs toward the surface. Desperate and clumsy, but moving upward. 1 meter. His arms were failing. The muscles were done. He couldn't hold on much longer. He reached up one more time and his fingers found the next strut. He pulled with everything he had left. His body rose. The checkpoint panel was right there, level with his chest. Jake pressed his left wrist against the scanner. Nothing happened. He pressed harder. Still nothing. Why wasn't it working? Commander Vrelk stood in the observation room at the top of the final checkpoint tower. He had been monitoring the trial from here for the past 12 hours, watching the remaining cadets struggle toward the finish line. The results were displayed on screens around the room. Out of 200 cadets who started, 193 had dropped out or been disqualified. 7 cadets remained active in the trial. 6 of them had already activated their emergency beacons in the last 2 hours. The storms, the heat, the exhaustion had been too much. That left only 1 cadet still moving toward the checkpoint. Cadet Morrison is still approaching, Lieutenant Vess said. The reptilian officer was studying a tracking screen. But his vital signs are concerning. Heart rate elevated. Core temperature fluctuating. He should have activated his beacon hours ago. Vrelk watched the tracker. The human was moving very slowly. Too slowly. At his current pace, he would not reach the tower before the 72-hour deadline. How much time remains? Vrelk asked. 1 hour and 43 minutes. And his distance from the tower? 5.2 kilometers. Vrelk calculated the numbers. Morrison would need to maintain a pace of 3 kilometers per hour to make it in time. According to his vital signs, the human was barely moving at 1 kilometer per hour. He will not make it, Vess said. We should send a medical extraction team now before he collapses completely. The trial rules are clear, Vrelk replied. We extract only when the cadet activates their beacon or when they are in immediate medical danger. Sir, he is in danger. Look at his vitals. Vrelk studied the screen. The human's heart rate was high but steady. His temperature was low but not critical. By the strict definition of the rules, Morrison was not in immediate danger. Extreme distress, yes, but not dying. We will monitor closely, Vrelk said, but we will not extract him unless he signals or his condition becomes critical. Over the next hour, they watched Morrison's slow progress on the tracking screen. His movement was erratic, stopping and starting. Several times he remained motionless for minutes at a time, and Vrelk thought he had finally given up. But then the tracker would show movement again. He is at the base of the final hill, Vess announced. 1.8 kilometers from the tower. 53 minutes remaining. Vrelk walked to the tower's window and looked out. In the distance, he could see a small figure moving up the hill. Not walking, crawling. The human is crawling, Vess asked in disbelief. Why does he not activate his beacon? Because he is human, Vrelk said quietly. I have studied their species since they joined the academy. They have a psychological trait their scientists call persistence hunting. For millions of years, they chased prey across their planet until the prey died of exhaustion. They did not need to be fast or strong. They just needed to refuse to stop. That is insane. Yes, Vrelk agreed, but effective. Morrison's progress up the hill was painful to watch. He would pull himself forward a few meters, then stop, then pull himself forward again. The vital sign monitor showed his body was running on nothing but willpower. 20 minutes remaining, Vess said. He is still 400 meters from the tower. He will not make it. But Morrison kept moving. Slower now, barely more than a meter per minute, but still moving. 10 minutes remaining. 200 meters. The other officers in the observation room had gathered at the windows. They were all watching the human's impossible effort. None of them spoke. There was something about Morrison's struggle that demanded silent respect. 5 minutes remaining. 80 meters. Vrelk checked his chronometer. The trial would end at exactly 72 hours. If Morrison did not touch the checkpoint scanner before then, he would fail. So close to success, but still a failure. 3 minutes. 40 meters. Morrison had stopped moving. He was lying motionless on the ground near the base of the tower. His vitals are dropping, Vess said urgently. Heart rate falling. I think he has lost consciousness. We should extract now. Vrelk raised one of his 4 hands. Wait. On the screen, Morrison's tracker showed movement again. Slight but definitely moving. 2 minutes. 20 meters. Through the window, Vrelk could see Morrison now. The human was at the base of the tower trying to stand up. His legs couldn't support him and he fell. 1 minute, 30 seconds. 15 meters, Morrison was crawling again. His hands were leaving bloody marks on the ground. 1 minute. 10 meters. The human stopped crawling. He was just lying there now, not moving at all. 45 seconds. Vrelk saw Morrison throw something away. His equipment belt with the emergency beacon still attached. Why would he do that? 30 seconds. 8 meters. Morrison was moving backward now, sliding across the ground using his elbows and shoulders. What was he doing? 15 seconds. 2 meters. The human had reached the tower's base, but the checkpoint scanner was 2 meters above the ground. Morrison couldn't walk. How would he reach it? 10 seconds. Morrison grabbed the tower's metal struts and started pulling himself up. His arms were shaking with effort. 5 seconds, the human was climbing slowly, one hand over the other, rising up the tower's framework. 3 seconds. Morrison's wrist touched the checkpoint scanner. The panel lit green. The confirmation tone sounded. Trial complete, Vess announced. Cadet Morrison has finished at 72 hours, 0 minutes, 3 seconds. The observation room erupted in noise. Officers from a dozen different species were all talking at once, pointing at the screens, gesturing in disbelief. Vrelk raised his hands for silence. Lieutenant Vess dispatched the medical team immediately. Cadet Morrison needs treatment. Yes, sir. Vrelk descended from the observation room and walked out to where Morrison lay on the ground. The human had collapsed after touching the scanner. His eyes were open but unfocused. His breathing was shallow. The medical team arrived within 2 minutes. They loaded Morrison onto a stretcher and began treating him. One of the medics, a gentle creature from the Pallian species, looked at Morrison's feet and made a distressed sound. Commander, this cadet's injuries are severe. How long was he walking on these feet? Approximately 60 hours, Vrelk replied. That should not be possible. And yet he did it. They loaded Morrison into the medical transport ship. Vrelk climbed in with them. As the ship lifted off, he looked down at Epsilon 7's harsh surface. Somewhere down there, 199 other cadets had decided the trial was too hard. Only one had refused to accept that answer. The flight back to the academy took 4 hours. Morrison drifted in and out of consciousness during the journey. The medical team worked on him constantly, treating his wounds, rehydrating him, monitoring his vital signs. When they arrived at the academy's medical center, a crowd had gathered. Word had spread quickly about the human who completed the trial. Cadets lined the corridors waiting to see Morrison brought in. Vrelk saw Prella floating near the entrance, her bioluminescent body glowing bright with excitement. Jos was there too, his head bandaged but his 3 eyes wide with amazement. Kortho stood on all 6 legs, his injured rear leg now properly treated. As the medics wheeled Morrison past on the stretcher, the cadets began to applaud. Not just the humans, but aliens from dozens of species. The sound filled the corridor, echoing off the walls. Morrison's eyes opened slightly. He looked around at the crowd, confused. "You did it," Prella said, floating alongside the stretcher. "You finished the trial, Jake, 72 hours. A small smile crossed Morrison's face. Then his eyes closed again and he drifted back into unconsciousness. The medical team took him to an intensive care room. The lead doctor, a Threxian named Keller, examined him thoroughly. After 2 hours, she came out to brief Commander Vrelk. "His condition is stable," Dr. Keller reported. "Severe dehydration, multiple lacerations, second-degree burns on exposed skin, damage to both feet that will require extensive treatment, muscle degradation, and complete exhaustion. But nothing that will not heal with time. How long until he recovers?" "Full recovery, 2 weeks minimum. But he could be released from intensive care in 48 hours. "Thank you, Doctor." Vrelk returned to his office and began writing his report on the trial. When he reached the section about Morrison's performance, he paused. How did one describe what the human had done? The numbers told part of the story. 72 hours, 4 checkpoints, approximately 100 kilometers traveled. But numbers did not capture the determination, the refusal to quit even when quitting was the logical choice. He wrote, "Cadet Jake Morrison demonstrated the extreme limits of human endurance and willpower. His completion of the survival trial was not due to superior physical capabilities, but rather to an unusual psychological trait that allows humans to override their body's natural safety mechanisms. This makes them uniquely suited for operations requiring extended periods of stress and hardship." The report was sent to the Galactic Military Command, where it would be read by senior officers across a dozen species. Vrelk knew it would generate discussion. Some would argue that humans were too stubborn for their own good, that Morrison's refusal to activate his beacon was reckless rather than admirable. But Vrelk had seen too many battles in his long career. He knew that wars were not won by species who quit when things got difficult. They were won by those who kept fighting when defeat seemed certain. Maybe the humans. 3 weeks after completing the survival trial, Jake Morrison stood in front of the academy board. His feet had healed enough to walk without pain, though the doctors said he would carry scars for the rest of his life. His hands were still bandaged and his skin was still recovering from the burns and cuts. The board consisted of 7 high-ranking officers from different species. They sat in a semicircle, looking down at Jake with expressions that ranged from curiosity to disapproval. Commander Vrelk was among them, his forearms folded across his chest and his compound eyes unreadable. Admiral Kress, a massive being from the heavy gravity world of Titan 9, spoke first. Her voice was deep and rumbling. "Cadet Morrison, we have reviewed your performance in the survival trial. Your completion of the full 72 hours is unprecedented for a human cadet." "Thank you, Admiral," Jake said. "However," Kress continued, "there are concerns about your methods. You sustained serious injuries that required weeks of medical treatment. You pushed your body far beyond safe limits. Some members of this board believe your actions were reckless and demonstrate poor judgment." Jake remained silent, waiting to see where this was going. Another board member spoke up. It was General Thane, a bird-like creature with bright feathers and sharp eyes. "Cadet Morrison, why did you not activate your emergency beacon? Your vital signs clearly showed you were in distress for the final 12 hours of the trial. The logical choice would have been to signal for extraction." Jake thought about his answer carefully. "Sir, I did not feel I was in immediate danger. I was in pain and exhausted, but I believed I could reach the final checkpoint. Activating the beacon would have meant giving up, and I did not want to do that." "But you were crawling," Thane said. Your legs had stopped functioning. How is that not immediate danger? My legs were tired, sir, but my arms still worked. I could still move forward. That was enough. General Thane made a clicking sound of disapproval. This is exactly the problem with human cadets. You do not know when to quit. In real combat situations, that kind of stubbornness will get you killed. Or it will save lives, Commander Vrelk said quietly. The other board members turned to look at him. Vrelk uncrossed his arms and leaned forward. I have been reviewing historical data from other species, Vrelk said. There are multiple recorded instances where human soldiers continued fighting after sustaining injuries that would have incapacitated members of other species. There are cases where human medics crawled through battlefields to reach wounded soldiers, despite being injured themselves. This trait, this refusal to stop, has saved countless lives. It has also cost lives, General Thane countered. Humans who pushed too far and died when they should have retreated. That is true of every species, Vrelk replied. But the question before us is not whether Cadet Morrison's actions were risky. They clearly were. The question is whether his completion of the trial demonstrates qualities we value in military officers. Admiral Kress nodded slowly. An interesting point. Cadet Morrison, let me ask you directly. If you were leading a squad and one of your soldiers was injured, would you order them to keep fighting past their limits, or would you order them to fall back? Jake considered the question. It felt like a trap, but he decided to answer honestly. It would depend on the situation, Admiral. If falling back meant abandoning other soldiers or failing a critical mission, I would ask my squad to push through the pain. But I would only ask them to do what I would be willing to do myself. I would never order someone to sacrifice themselves pointlessly. And if you were the injured soldier? Kress asked. Would you obey an order to fall back, even if you thought you could keep fighting? That would be harder, Jake admitted. But yes, I would obey. Following orders is part of being a soldier, though I might argue with my commanding officer first. Several of the board members made sounds that might have been laughter. Even General Thane's feathers ruffled in what looked like amusement. Admiral Kress looked at the other board members. Any other questions for the cadet? A third officer spoke up. This was Captain Lorne, a scaled reptilian with red eyes. Cadet Morrison, your actions during the trial have attracted significant attention. Your story has spread across multiple worlds. Some species view you as a symbol of human determination. Others see you as a cautionary tale about human recklessness. How do you feel about becoming this symbol? Jake shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the question. Sir, I was not trying to become a symbol. I was just trying to complete the trial. What others think about it is not something I can control. But it affects how humans are perceived in the military, Lorne pressed. Before you, most species viewed humans as physically weak compared to other races. Now they view you as stubbornly persistent. Is that better or worse? I think it is more accurate, Jake said. Humans are not the strongest or fastest species, but we are good at enduring hardship. If that changes how other species see us, then maybe they will stop underestimating us. Lorne's eyes narrowed. You think other species underestimate humans? Yes, sir. I have heard the comments. I have seen the looks.
Many aliens think Earth should not have been admitted to the Galactic Alliance.
They think we are too primitive, too violent, too unpredictable. The survival trial was a chance to prove we belong here. And do you think you succeeded? Lorne asked. I think I showed that humans can do things others believe are impossible. Whether that proves we belong here is for this board to decide. There was a long silence. The board members looked at each other, communicating in ways Jake could not interpret. Finally, Admiral Kress spoke again. Cadet Morrison, this board has reached a decision regarding your status at the Academy. Given your successful completion of the survival trial and your demonstrated abilities, you will be advanced to the second-year class ahead of schedule. You will also be assigned additional training in leadership and tactics. Jake felt a wave of relief. He had been worried they would expel him for being too reckless. Thank you, Admiral. However, Kress continued, you will also be required to work with the medical staff to develop better safety protocols for future human cadets. Your injuries were extensive, and we cannot have cadets regularly pushing themselves to that degree. Do you understand? Yes, Admiral. I understand. Dismissed, Cadet. Jake saluted and left the boardroom. Outside in the corridor, Prella was waiting for him. Her bioluminescent body was flickering with anxiety. What did they say? She asked. I have been advanced to second year, Jake said, still processing the news. And I have to help develop new safety protocols. That is wonderful. Prella's body glowed brighter. I knew they would recognize what you accomplished. Jose came running up on his 3 legs, moving with his characteristic speed. His head injury had healed completely. Morrison, I heard the news. You are moving up to 2nd year. That is incredible. Thanks, Zos. Korthos emerged from a side corridor, walking on all 6 legs. The injured rear leg was fully healed now. The human who would not quit. You have become famous, Morrison. Cadets from other classes ask about you constantly. Jake felt his face grow warm. I was just doing what anyone would do. No, Korthos said firmly. You did what no one else would do. That is why it matters. Over the following weeks, Jake settled into his new routine as a 2nd-year cadet. The classes were harder, the training more intense, but he felt ready for it. His experience in the survival trial had changed him in ways he was still discovering. Other human cadets began arriving at the academy. Earth had sent a new group, eager to prove themselves after hearing about Jake's accomplishment. They sought him out, asking for advice, wanting to know how he had pushed through the pain and exhaustion. Jake tried to help them, but he struggled to explain it. How did you teach someone to refuse to quit?
How did you train determination?
One day, a new human cadet named Pete found Jake in the training center. Pete was young, barely 18, and looked nervous about being so far from Earth. Cadet Morrison? Pete said hesitantly. Can I ask you something? Just call me Jake, and yes, ask whatever you want. How did you do it? The survival trial, I mean. Everyone says it was impossible. How did you keep going when your body was telling you to stop? Jake sat down and thought about the question. He had been asked it many times, but he still did not have a perfect answer. I kept thinking about everyone who had dropped out. Jake said finally, all the cadets who had activated their beacons because the trial was too hard. And I thought about all the people back on Earth who said humans did not belong in space. Every time I wanted to quit, I thought about proving them wrong. That was stronger than the pain. So it was about pride? Pete asked. No, pride makes you do stupid things. This was about purpose. I had a reason to finish that was bigger than my own comfort. That is what kept me going. Pete nodded slowly, taking in the words. I am afraid I will fail the trial when my turn comes. I am not as strong as you. Strength does not matter as much as you think, Jake said. The trial is not really about your body. It is about your mind. If you can convince your mind to keep going, your body will find a way to follow. Most of the time. Most of the time? Jake held up his scarred hands. Sometimes your body really does reach its limit. You have to be smart enough to know the difference between I cannot do this and